Welcome to the real world. My name is Cameron. Thank you so much for joining us here on episode 75 of the Real World Podcast. We are really excited for you to join us. If you're a movie fan, you're in the right place. Today, we're talking all about Wonka and our favorite movie prequels. Thank you so much for joining us here in the real world. If you haven't joined us before, make sure you hit the like button, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified of all our videos. Let's kick things off as we usually do with some movie news. Godzilla Minus One expands to 2,600 theaters this week. If you have not checked out this movie yet, I think it's the film that you must see this holiday season. It is now expanding to 2,600 theaters all across America. This movie is absolutely incredible. We've got a reaction and a review on the channel right now. It's a five-star film, in my opinion, a must-see movie. Denis Villeneuve confirms he is writing Dune 3. He might try to direct something else in between parts 2 and 3 just for his own sanity, but he desperately wants to make the third film in this trilogy. It would be based on the third book in the saga Dune Messiah. And if the second film is as successful as the first, the third movie is very likely to happen. Christian Bale and Bradley Cooper are re-teaming after they teamed up on American Hustle for a new film titled Best of Enemies. It will be written by Eric Warren Singer, who also wrote American Hustle. This film follows a CIA spy and a KGB agent as they develop a bond during the final days of the Cold War and try to convince one another to betray their respective governments. This is a really interesting idea. It's based on a book. And so very excited to see what ends up coming of this movie. Benny Safdie, half of the Safdie brothers who directed Uncut Gems, is teaming with The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, who will star as MMA fighter Mark Kerr in his tale of fame, addiction, and love, which is set to start shooting very soon. This is a bit of a departure for The Rock, who's done a lot of comedy and action roles recently. This will be a return to more dramatic fare for the actor. Ryan Gosling was set to appear as the Wolfman in Universal's latest telling of that classic tale, but Christopher Abbott has replaced him. There was some scheduling conflicts, and so Christopher Abbott will now be the actor playing the titular character in the next film titled Wolfman, directed by Lee Whannell. Lee Whannell did a couple of movies I'm a big fan of. One is Upgrade, and the other is another modern adaptation of one of the Universal Monster classics, The Invisible Man. So very, very excited to see what they're going to do with this. The Wolfman is my favorite of all the classic Universal monsters, so this has me pretty excited. New trailers came out this week for If, the latest film from John Krasinski starring Ryan Reynolds, Kung Fu Panda 4, which now has Viola Davis and Awkwafina voicing characters, Beverly Hills Cop Axel Foley, the latest from Eddie Murphy, Self-Reliance starring Jake Johnson, and Civil War from director Alex Garland. I'm looking forward to all these films. I think they're going to be very interesting. A lot of cool ideas here, some pretty original ideas, a couple of sequels. So we'll have to keep our eyes out, see how these movies turn out. All of them are set to release in 2024. All right, folks, well, that will do it for movie news. Now it's time to jump into our main topic, which is the new movie that came out this weekend, Wonka. So we're excited to talk about this, and we're also going to run down our top 5 prequel movies. We'll get into that in just a moment. But joining me on this episode is Josh. How you doing, man?
Hey, doing well, thank you. Excited to talk about Wonka and these prequels.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. We haven't done a prequel podcast yet, so I'm excited to talk about those. But let's start with Wonka. This movie came out this weekend. We both got a chance to see it, so let's dive in. All right, so we're gonna get into Wonka now. Spoiler free, so if you haven't seen the movie, you can watch this part. We'll let you know when we'll get into spoilers in just a moment. But just wanted to give some spoiler free thoughts on this film. I really enjoyed it. I had a good time watching it. It definitely leans more into the musical aspect of the original film. It also leans more into the kind of fantastical, magical aspects of the movie, which I thought was interesting. I'm a huge fan of the original. I guess I'll get that out of the way. I grew up watching that 1971 film with Gene Wilder. It was one of my dad's favorites. He showed it to us. So that's been a staple in my life for a long time. So going into this one, I was interested. I couldn't I wouldn't say I was excited necessarily. The trailer kind of I liked the trailer okay up to a certain point. I think when I saw Hugh Grant as an Oompa Loompa is when I was kind of like, I don't know about that. That's didn't seem to work too well. But I was interested, but not super excited about it.
Mm,
Right away, though, I really got drawn into the story, mainly because of Timothy Chalamet. I mean, I think he's just a fantastic actor and was a really
yeah.
good choice for this role. So he was a big part of what made me enjoy the movie. I thought, it definitely takes a kind of more kiddie approach. It's very silly. It can get very goofy at times, but overall, I did enjoy it. I enjoyed the performances overall. I thought that it really, definitely had an optimistic and hopeful kind of vibe to it, which I really
Mhm.
enjoyed too. So overall, I did enjoy it. I gave it 3.5 stars. I wasn't over the moon about it. I don't think it's one of my favorites of the year or anything, but it's one that I had a good time watching and wouldn't mind watching again. So that's kind of where I'm at on it. Josh, what were your thoughts on Wonka?
I'll start with the trailer. I don't know. Like you said, Timothy Chalamet is a fantastic actor, and he's one of my favorite actors. And so just seeing him in this role, and that it was going to be musical, like I'm already like, yeah, let's go. I'm in.
Yeah.
um, so I was looking forward to it. I really enjoyed it. Kind of like you said, I think I rated it 4 stars
Okay.
overall. I didn't mind the I guess like the kiddiness and the silliness didn't necessarily really feel out of place. I think maybe like once or twice I like thought about it and like thought about it versus the original movie or something like that. But I think it's because he's a younger Wonka. It just
Yeah.
kind of like it seems natural.
Right. Sure.
Um, I would say maybe. All the acting was great. The supporting cast was great. I really liked the songs and the whimsical nature of it. There's a couple earworms there.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. I really had a good time with it. So
Excellent.
I would see it again, and maybe it would go up. I don't know. I'm a sucker for musicals. So anytime where it's just like a fun blast, and especially when you don't expect it,
Yeah.
which obviously they told you it was going to be musical, but like
Sure.
as you're watching it, certain things, the way someone can get into a song or like a group of people can get into a song spontaneously,
Yeah.
which is as a musical does, but
Right.
in the way that they do it, where it's like I don't know, I can't really say without going into spoilers
Sure.
how, but
Yeah.
they do that here where it's just like so much fun and kind of like they did with the Marvels, where you're like that was unexpected and
Right.
it brought like a fun and vibrance to it. So I think that they succeed with that here as well.
Great. Yeah, I think you just mentioned the vibrant. It made me think of the color. I really like the use of color here. It's
Mm.
very bright and fun, and so I thought the visuals were really good as well, as the music and the performances. So yeah, overall, I would definitely recommend it, especially for families. I think it's a very wholesome
Mhm.
film. It's there's nothing really too crude or crass in it. So I would definitely recommend it. I think it's going to do pretty well over the weekend and over the next weekend as we get into the
Probably.
holidays. I think it'll end up doing really well. I think it could be kind of like a Greatest Showman kind of sleeper hit that comes
Ooh,
in and does really well. So we'll have to wait and see.
I
But
think you're right.
yeah. So what is you said your star rating was 4. What was your relationship with the original? Did you grow up watching that?
Yes, sorry, I
Okay.
forgot to say that. Yeah, we grew up with the original. The Johnny Depp Tim Burton one came out, and I was disappointed it wasn't a sequel, even though the book is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But
Right.
the first one ends with him getting it, and then it's called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, so you're expecting a sequel,
Right.
and then it was just like a reboot, and it was like, oh, I thought there's some good things about it, but overall, it doesn't compare to the original. Johnny Depp
Yeah.
does a good job, obviously, but yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't compare to the original. And then I thought this, while you're right, it does have a little bit different tonally, like a little more, maybe a little more whimsy, a little more fantasy.
Hmm.
I don't know. I think it plays in well. It takes some of the really good things about the original and kind of amps them up a little bit,
Yes.
for like not in a bad way though.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'm not a fan at all of the Tim Burton one. They just went such a different direction with it. It didn't at all feel, which I guess when you're remaking, that's part of it. But
That's true.
they they abandoned like so much of what I liked about that original.
Mm.
And I didn't find Johnny Depp's take on the character to be very likable. So
Yeah, that's
I
true.
think what Chalamet does here is he makes him very likable. And yeah, they play directly into that original movie, even with, pure imagination and that whole thing. The design of the Oompa Loompas, like all of it. So I like that.
Yeah. So that was another thing too I forgot is the like some movies like, you know, I don't mind fan service generally, but sometimes it can be a little much and what have you. But or nods and things like that. But I thought this one actually did it really well. Like it wasn't like a wink and a nod to the audience. It was
Yes.
all very subtle. And so if you
Yeah.
caught it, you were like, "Oh, that's cool." But if you didn't, whatever. So
Exactly.
I thought they did a good job with that. They just kind of sprinkled it throughout, and it was really cool, either audibly, visually, what have you.
Yep,
Like you
exactly. I
said with
totally
imagination.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally agree. Totally agree. Cool. All right. Well, let's get into spoilers. So, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it. We're going to talk all about the details of the movie now. So I really, like I said, it kind of grabbed me at the beginning with that boat shot. That was a really good shot, the way it goes all the way
Mm,
up to Willie, and he's singing that song and kind of basically singing his backstory, kind of like getting us caught up where
yeah.
he is and everything. It was just a clever way to do that, I think. And then,
I agree.
that whole opening of him going through the city and losing all his money in like
That was
5 minutes, it was
funny.
just so well done. I really enjoyed that. Because he's kind of getting swindled, but he's also trying to help people. Like again, he just really
Yeah,
is a very endearing character. You really like him right off the
that's
bat.
true.
So the whole opening was great. And then supporting cast, Olivia Colman, I think is fantastic as kind of one of the villains
As
here.
always.
Yeah, she's so good. And then we of course have this young actress. What is her name? Do you have her name? I meant to write that down.
I don't know if I'm gonna pronounce it right, but Kala Lane.
Yes, fantastic actress. She
Yeah,
did a really good job here, playing her role as well. And then Sally Hawkins is an actress I've always liked. She came over from Paddington. Paul King, who directed the Paddington movies, and she's in
oh, okay.
those. And she did a fantastic job. Her very minimal roles. She's got like what
Oh
two
yeah, yeah.
scenes, but just very impactful. Great performance. And then
Yes.
the one I was most worried about, of course, was Hugh Grant from the trailer. He was an Oompa Loompa. I just couldn't make it work in my head. But what I think
I
was
feel like only
smart,
he could.
yeah, right. I think what was smart about the way they did it was he's not really in the movie a lot. He's really
That's
only
true.
in a handful of scenes.
Hmm.
He's alluded to, and then when you finally see him, I think it works because it's minimal. I think if he had been like the sidekick throughout
Mm.
the whole movie, that would have probably put me off a lot more.
Yeah, that's true.
But the way they used him fairly minimally, I thought was actually very clever. So much so that I actually kind of want a movie now where Wonka goes back to Oompa Loompa Land and like gets all of his buddies to come join the chocolate
Yeah,
factory with him. That's kind of what I want now. Like a survivalist adventure movie on this island with all these Oompa Loompas and all these creatures and things like that. I think that could be a
that would
lot of
be
fun.
crazy.
But yeah, so anyways, that's kind of some of my spoiler thoughts. What do you want to talk about with when it comes to spoilers?
Well, with Hugh Grant, that he uh I'm glad they went the route of the original, not the route of the Tim Burton where they're all him. Because I think that would have
Yes,
added to making it not work. So I'm
definitely.
glad they're all individual Oompa Loompas or their own actors,
Yes,
individual actors.
right.
Um, but yeah, but with that first song, I usually like I know for the most part, musicals always record the songs after the fact or before or what have you. It's not live essentially,
Right.
and that's like why the Les Mis one was so revolutionary at the time because it was all recorded live and for such a
Yes.
big musical. But with this, usually you can't like maybe with like the Disney Channel movies and you hear the auto tune, they're not really singing it live. But with
Sure.
something, I don't know what it was. Something with the first song, the first part of the first song when he's on the boat anyway. It was like I can tell you're not singing it, and I don't
Sure.
know if that was, I don't know why. So
Yeah.
that part, but other than that, the rest of the movie was fine. Didn't notice a thing.
Gotcha.
Um, that's really the only bad thing I could say about the movie at all. Was just that little bit in the beginning. But
Gotcha.
yeah, like you said, the whole opening, and then he goes into the city and everything, and it was just such a little fun way for him to like lose all his money. He's like telling the kid like, "Get away from me! You're
Right.
gonna get all my money."
Yes.
Um, and then he drops it in the
Mm,
last one in the
through
water.
the
I thought was
pocket,
funny
yeah.
too. Yes, he misses. I don't
Right.
know. There was just such a I don't know the word to describe, but just like an immediate, like you said, an immediately endearing character
Yes.
um, that Chalamet brought to Wonka here, and I really liked his, like you said, his like he's trying to do good, but he's not necessarily streetwise, and so that kind of gets him into some trouble.
Right.
I thought it was interesting he couldn't read. I
Yeah.
wasn't. That was unexpected and interesting. I was like, wait, why is he just okay with signing the thing? And then like you find out later, I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Like
Yeah,
it's
that
I
was
don't know. They
that
haven't
was
mentioned anything about that before, right? That's brand new.
yeah, yeah, it is, as far as I know. And my brother had an interesting point about that is he kind of wishes that they had set that up a little earlier because there is great emotional payoff when he finally does read that note that his mom had in the bar of chocolate. But if I think if
Mm.
we had set that up beforehand better, that could have really hit harder. As
Like
like
we see him reading it,
yeah,
but
we
he
see
doesn't
him like, yeah,
actually
we don't know what it says,
looking
but
at
we're
it.
seeing he's like looking at it like he wants to read it,
Ooh.
but he can't read it. He's not sure if he really wants to read it because he's not sure what it says. Like there could have been a really
Oh
interesting kind
man.
of dynamic there that they, I think, kind of missed out on. It's still a
Oh
great
man.
moment at the end, but I think
It
that
is.
that could have been done a little bit better. The only other criticism I really have is a couple things that I feel like it did get a little predictable. Like I kind of understood like where we were going with the story, which is many family films are that way. But I just felt like
Yeah.
the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory with Gene Wilder, everything that happened was so unexpected. Like every new thing was like, what's going to happen when they go in this room? Like you have no idea. Whereas this one was a little more like, okay, I think I know where they're going with this whole chocolate cartel thing, which I thought was pretty clever.
Yeah.
But it was just a little bit predictable. And then the CGI I thought was fairly well done, but it to me at certain moments it got a little too much. It got a little too crazy, whereas I wish they had kind of reined that in just a little bit to make it feel a little more
Like
grounded.
like with the
Um,
giraffe or
the
like with other
giraffe,
just random things.
the giraffe and the chocolate factory, the shop, I mean, when he opens that up, that seemed a
Oh,
little
okay.
bit too fantastical for me, but it wasn't terrible. It was just I wish they had maybe grounded it a little bit more. So yeah,
Well,
those are
I
the
wonder. Oh, sorry. I say I
no,
wonder how much it would be interesting to see behind the scenes footage of the shop and see how much was really there.
yes.
Because some of the stuff, like the tree, that's pretty big, but he was like on top of it and everything. So it seemed like maybe that would have been there.
Yes, yes. I think I did see some B-roll on YouTube, and I think there was something built there that he could climb on. I can't remember if it was
Maybe
like
they
an
don't need the
actual
foliage.
tree or yeah.
Foliage.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't exactly remember, but yeah, I definitely want to watch some behind the scenes footage and find out how much of it was practical. But yeah, anyways, that's all I really had on as far as critiques. I like I said, I thought it was very charming. You know,
Yeah,
it was a movie that I enjoyed watch, had a smile on my face most of the time. You know, I love
same.
any movie that's about kind of dreaming and imagination and you know that kind of stuff is always fun to me. And I think it's a worthy prequel. I think this watching this
Yeah.
and then going actually did watch part of the original yesterday,
Oh,
and
nice.
I think it works pretty well. I think it's interesting because I really do think they could make another film that would be kind of a cool
Yeah.
lead in to the original. And then you kind of have a trilogy. So I'd be interested to see if this does well, if they do end up making another one, what that could be. Because yeah, you can kind of get the trajectory of like he's spending all this time with these Oompa Loompas. He's not with the humans anymore. He becomes kind of kooky, and that's why
Mm.
he is the way he is in the original. I don't know. There's all kinds of different things you could do with it. But yeah, overall, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, same. And one thing I'll comment on, I forgot to comment on Sally Hawkins's performance.
Mm,
Exactly what you said. She only has such a small part,
right.
but I don't know what it was just perfectly acted, and she just did it so well that you
Yeah.
like immediately all the like emotional resonance is there, and
Hmm.
which you need for the payoff at the end.
Right.
And yeah, I don't know. It was just it was she did a really good job.
Definitely, definitely agree. Okay, great. Well, that's it for our spoiler review of Wonka. Make sure if you watched it, you comment below. We want to know what your review is. We're also both on Letterboxd, so you can read our reviews there. Those links are in the description. Now it's time to get into some of our favorite prequel movies. So Wonka, now in theaters, is a prequel to, as we said, the 1971 film starring Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So we thought this would be a great time to talk about prequels. What is a prequel? Some may be asking. Prequels are simply a movie that takes place before the events of an original film. So sequels, as we know, take place after original movies. But if you want to tell the backstory of a character, you make a prequel. And so that's what all these films are going to be. There are all kinds of different ones out there. It's become very popular recently, I guess, especially since the Star Wars prequels. I think that's really what popularized it.
Hmm.
But there were a few before then. So, yeah, we're going to take a look at these prequels. We each have a top five list. So, we're going to be listing those off for you now. First, let's talk about some honorable mentions. I'm going to kick us off with one. It's called Gods and Generals. This is a Civil War
Hmm.
film. It's a prequel to Gettysburg. So, these two films go hand in hand. They're same director, and
Oh,
Gettysburg was released first. It was released in I think '93, and then Gods and Generals was not released until I think 2001. So
wow.
he made the Gettysburg film about the Battle of Gettysburg, and then Gods and Generals is a much kind of more epic film in that it takes place all across the United
Hmm.
States at the time and covers all kinds of different characters on either side of the war. So both are well worth watching. But Gods and Generals is the movie I slightly prefer to Gettysburg. So
Really?
yeah, I do. I
Hot
do.
take there.
Yeah, they're both great. I know a lot of people do prefer Gettysburg, but Gods and Generals, I just feel like has a great kind of nuanced approach to the whole thing and great characters, great acting, and great battle sequences. So it just has all of it. But both are, like I said, both are well worth watching. So I had to mention that one. Also wanted to mention Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again. Now, this is kind of one of these that could be considered a sequel or a pre. It's really both because it
Hmm.
takes place after the original, but you're getting extended flashbacks to Meryl Streep's character when she's younger, played here by Lily James. So this is the
Ah,
wife's, favorite musical. She watches both of these movies a lot. I We
oh,
argue a
nice.
lot about which one's better. I do think this one is better than the original. But it's worth watching. If you like that first Mamma Mia movie, it's a great kind of companion piece to it. So
Hmm.
had to mention that one. It's kind of an outside the box choice. And then going into the MonsterVerse, I'm a big fan of Kong Skull Island. I think this was a great film,
Yep.
which does take place at or before the 2014 Godzilla movie. It was made in 2017, takes place back in the 70s, not in modern day. So that was one that I definitely wanted to bring up. This might still be my favorite of all the MonsterVerse movies. It's really, really good.
Mm.
Has kind of like Apocalypse Now vibes, that kind of Vietnam era war movie
Yeah.
with all these monsters going on and a great cast. John C.
A song
Riley's
playing on the
my favorite.
helicopter.
Exactly, yes, yes, same song playing on the helicopter too. So yeah, very well done. Jordan Voight Roberts made that movie and he did a great job. Then I wanted to dive into a couple of superhero movies, one from the MCU. It is Eternals. So Eternals is a prequel to the
Ah.
entire MCU in some flashbacks. Again, it's one of those that like the majority of the story is post-Endgame, but they are flashing back a lot to their lives, in the distant past, before Iron
Hmm.
Man 1, before Captain America, the First Avenger, any of that. So you could consider it a prequel, I think, if you wanted to kind of stretch it a little bit. But yeah, that's one that I do quite enjoy. And then lastly is DC's Wonder Woman, which of course takes place in World War One, well before the events where we first see her in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. So that was one that was very close to making. I'm a big fan of this movie. Really like every cast member in this, every action sequence, the way it's shot is just fantastic. Her theme, the musical theme is so good for
Yes.
that character. So definitely had to mention that. Let me let you give a few years. I've got just a couple more here, but I wanted you
Okay.
to mention a few of your honorable mentions, Josh.
Yeah, I had Wonder Woman and Kong Skull Island as well. I have Indiana Jones Temple of Doom,
Hmm.
Lion King 1.5. That's kind of it's kind of a prequel. It kind of like you said, it kind of plays both. You're seeing amidst the story, if I can pronounce that
Yes.
correctly.
Right.
But you're also seeing before,
Right.
so some lead into to that as well with Pumbaa and Timon.
Yes.
And then I really liked the Predator prequel, Prey.
Mm.
That
Oh yeah.
was a really cool. And another this was a TV movie, so but it was, or I guess it was released as a couple episodes they put together as a movie. But Davy Crockett and the River Pirates, which
Oh,
is a prequel
yes.
to the Alamo movie, which is
Right.
most people are more familiar with. But the
Yes.
River Pirates one is a pretty fun adventure
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
with Fess
Great.
Parker as Davy Crockett.
Yes. Yes. He's great. I like those movies a lot. Okay, two more I wanted to mention. Now, these aren't on my list, really just because I don't technically consider them prequels. If they're in your list, that's fine. But
Oh, okay.
one is Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which I consider a reboot.
Mm.
Again, terminology, like again, some people consider this a prequel. That's fine. I consider it a reboot because we don't really know exactly how the original is going to tie in. Like, I guess if they keep going through this series, they could eventually tie it in and make it a prequel. But in the original series of five films, they don't really mention the simian flu, which is kind of what happens in these movies. I
Mm.
think they mentioned that it's nuclear war. So if it's in your list and your prequel list, that's fine. I just consider it a reboot. That's why it's not in my list. So that one, and then the other one, of course, is J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, which again I
Ah,
consider a reboot because it's an alternate timeline that's created through the events of this film, the time travel that
but
happens.
there's a
So
tiny bit that's not.
that's true. That's true. There is a little bit that's not. So if it's in your prequel list, that's fine. Again, I consider this series to be a reboot of the Star Trek franchise,
Mm,
not a prequel to the original film. So I really tried to make sure that mine were all technically prequels. Like you can
mm,
watch this
mhm.
movie, then watch the next movie, and it all makes sense and works. So
That's a good point.
that's the only reason why those aren't in there. So any more honorable mentions for you?
Yeah, I didn't have Star Trek,
Okay,
but I didn't put Rise in there just because I don't know, I haven't seen it in a while, and it's my least favorite of the three,
sure.
but because they all get better than
Right.
the previous one, and they're all
Right.
excellent. But
Yeah.
I did have Dawn of the Planet of the Apes in my
Okay.
prequels, and I know it is technically kind of a reboot, but if I remember right, I think Andy Serkis said like if they keep making these, that they would make it up all the way to the point of the first movie, the
Sure.
original one.
Right, right.
So that's kind of wiggle in there and say I'll consider it a prequel.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think other ones real quick. Wonka, the new Hunger Games movie, Battle of
Yeah.
Songbirds and Snakes,
Yep.
the first two Fantastic Beasts films,
Right.
the Star Wars prequels,
Yeah.
Solo,
Mm.
and then I think the only ones I have is Bumblebee, which was really good.
Mm.
Um, X-Men First Class, and then kind of
Mm.
continuing on that prequel strain. I also put Dark Phoenix in here, and then Alien Covenant.
Great. Great picks. Yeah, Bumblebee was another one I considered. But again, I feel like, especially now that Rise of the Beast has come out, it really does feel like a reboot. Um, just
That's
because of
true
the
with the
way
different.
Optimus comes to Earth now and like it doesn't match up with the original Bay film. So yeah, that was one I considered though, for sure. That's a good one. Okay, cool. Well, I think that's it for honorable mention. So let's jump in with our top five prequel movies. All right, folks, it's time to jump into our top five. Here it is. Josh, why don't you kick us off?
So what I said earlier about Planet of the Apes, I did put War for the Planet of the Apes at
Okay,
number five
great.
because I know it's like a little far along the prequel line, but
Sure.
it's technically if you know if everything works out, it's still before the originals.
Yes.
And we do have that new one coming out, Kingdom,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is gonna looks
Did you
really good.
hear that that
But
is going to take place 300 years later?
I didn't know exactly when, but I was looking at it. I was like, I couldn't remember exactly what happened until I
Right.
rewatched War for the Planet of the Apes, which spoilers, Caesar dies, and so I
Right.
was like, oh, is the new guy? Is it Cornelius? Is it his youngest son?
That's what I assumed.
But
Yeah.
but it looks like I think you're right because when I looked at I pulled it up on Letterbox and it made it sound like it didn't. I don't think it said 300 years, but it said like sometime after.
Yeah, the
And
director
then
was interviewed and he said it's 300 years later. It's a new character named
yeah,
Noah.
yeah, which that's crazy. Like, oh, that'll be. I guess it's good because that way we're not comparing Cornelius to Caesar and whatever, which we still I guess will a little bit, but it's like he's a totally different character. He's a totally new
Right.
character, not
Yes.
related. So
Yes.
they'll be. I don't know. It'll help it, I guess, a little bit,
I think so
especially
too.
because Andy Serkis was such a fantastic. Like, this
Incredible.
is probably the best motion capture. Like Davy Jones in this is
Yeah,
probably the best motion capture, like period. And it's
100%.
so it weirds me out, but in the best way possible because
Yeah.
you're watching it, and if you know what Andy Serkis looks like, if you can
Right.
recognize him, you 100% see
Yeah.
him in this performance as
Yeah.
Caesar. Uh, and it's like baffling. I have no idea how they did it, but
Me
it's
neither.
absolutely incredible.
It is.
Um, and then just the whole movie itself is just the best of these three, soon to be four, movies that we have right now. With just it brings something new. It brings emotional, like heart wrenching, right from the get go, pretty much. Returning of characters you love, like Maurice the orangutan, and there's more talking of the apes because it's been a little longer and since we first heard it in the second film. And then you have the interesting character of the little girl whose name I forget, and
Nova.
or Nova.
Yeah.
Yes, the little girl, and then Bad Ape, who
Yes.
is just those two characters balance out this bleak kind of revenge story
Yeah.
um, with so well because you have like the heart and the innocence of a child
Hmm.
in that character, and then her whole storyline with like the simian flu and everything. And
Yes.
then you have Bad Ape who can also talk and like, oh, maybe there's more. And
Right.
maybe that's what these new apes will be in the kingdom. Maybe they're not necessarily connected to Caesar's apes.
Right.
That'll be interesting. But he's such a fun character because he picks up some human dialogue and just the I don't remember who did the acting for it, but the
Steve Zahn.
delivery. Okay, yes, the
Yeah.
timing of the basically the comedic timing. He was a
Right.
perfect casting for that
Yes.
because both I assume he mocapped it as well. I'm not sure, but both
Right.
with his lines and how he delivers them, and then what he's doing, like acting visually,
Yep.
it's just so funny,
It
and
is.
it makes it really enjoyable. Something I think the other two films didn't necessarily have. They were
Yeah.
more a little more grim or a little more action oriented.
Right.
So that's kind of why this one is my favorite and why it's in my top five.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That film is definitely my favorite of the trilogy. It just brings the character arcs to a satisfying conclusion. It really does feel like the end of a trilogy, even though, there's plenty more they can do with the franchise, but it
Mhm.
really brings his character to a great conclusion. And like you're saying, the new characters they brought in were great. Woody Harrelson, I think, gives one of his best performances in the film.
Yes, yes,
Really, really intense and really well done. Great action sequences. It's sort of like a Great Escape type of story, which is a lot of fun too and adds a lot of tension. And it's just shot beautifully. Matt Reeves did a great job directing and writing that
absolutely.
that film, and Dawn. So yeah, excellent, excellent choice. Excellent choice. I've got to
Yeah,
say, good pick.
and the
Um,
CGI holds up. Like that was I think what 2019. So
it was
5 years later, CGI
2017.
still holds.
Yeah. Yeah,
2017,
it's 27.
even
So it's
better.
incredible how well it holds up. Yeah, it's to this day that, like you said, one of the best mocap films of all time because so many characters are CGI, and you
Mhm.
forget about that in the first opening scenes, even. So yeah, great, great pick. All right, well, next up is my number five pick, which is one that you already mentioned. It is Prey. Man, this one was so good. I just it kind of came out of nowhere. It was one of those that I wasn't sure what to expect. It was a cool
Mhm.
idea. The trailer definitely hooked me, but man, they just delivered on this film in a big, big way. Dan Trachtenberg, who directed 10 Cloverfield Lane, did an
Mhm.
excellent job with this. It's another very kind of intimate story. We're basically just with one character the whole way through. Amber Midthunder plays the lead role, and she just did a fantastic job. She, from what I know, one of her first major role, definitely, and she just did a great job with the emotional moments as well as the action. She was very believable
Hmm.
as this warrior character. It's a movie that I feel like this is really what I want all the big kind of sci-fi franchises, Terminator, RoboCop, Alien. I want them all to do what this film did and kind of just take it back to
Mm.
basics, like strip it
Yeah.
down, take it back to kind of its horror roots. Like all of these sci-fi franchises, a lot of them have roots in, the first Alien movie is just a straight up horror film. The first Terminator is much the same way. So I felt like this movie did that. Took it back to the original Predator, simplifying it. It's just one Predator, one character, kind of in this cat and mouse game, and it builds tension super well. It's got some very brutal violence in it, but it also has great themes, to it as well. And so it's one that I just think it delivered on everything I wanted it to be and
Mm.
more. Because again, I think keeping it simple. It seems like I feel like pitching this movie to a big studio would be like, are you sure people are going to watch that? Just like one character and a predator in a forest. But it really works. It really works because they had a great story they wanted to tell. They delivered on the visuals and just had a great, great way in to the story that was different but that
Hmm.
definitely felt like a Predator movie. So that's I think what all these franchises need to do. They need to Terminator needs to abandon all the crazy time travel and like the crazy timelines and all the madness and just simplify it and just have like a character facing off against a Terminator. And that's again what they did here that I think just worked spectacularly well. I think the future of the franchise is bright. I mean, they could go in so many different directions. You and I have talked about this. We could see Predators in all
Hmm.
kinds of different time eras, Predators versus samurai and Predators versus pirates and all kinds of cool ideas that they could delve into with this franchise now that they've done this. And so yeah, I'm really looking forward to whatever they do next. I don't know if there's anything kind of on the slate yet, but it was great. I really about the action sequences, a lot of people found them to be, I think, kind of unbelievable because, she's a young woman facing off against this giant beast. But to me, it works because she doesn't fight the thing head on.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where and this is all the Predator movies. I mean, even the original, where you had all these bodybuilders, commandos going into the jungle, getting torn apart. Eventually, they figure out that you have to outsmart it. You have to set traps for it. You have to kind of, lure it into a trap and do these different things. So, that's to me always been a part of the franchise. And so to me, it really worked here because that's exactly how she
Hmm.
ends up defeating it at the end. So just a great movie, great music too. Again, the way it builds intensity with the score and with the editing is really really well done. So if you haven't checked it out, it is on Hulu. They did finally release it on 4K as well.
Oh,
So you
really?
can yeah, you can actually get it on disc now, which is pretty cool. It's pretty rare that the streamers do that, but really glad they
Yeah.
released that one. So yeah, that's on my Christmas wish list. We'll see if I get it, but
Yeah.
it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't. Again, it's on Hulu streaming right now.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I know it's probably a crime, but this was actually my first my introduction into the Predator series.
Oh, cool. See, that's another cool thing about talking about these prequels is can you go in without seeing the original?
Mm.
Can you just go into the prequel and enjoy it? Or do you really
Yeah.
need the other knowledge? But I'm guessing you didn't really need it. You enjoyed the story as it is.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know really anything about the predator's species or whatever, except that they were like big bads and the general look of the creature.
Yeah,
Um, and I get that they're hunters, but I guess you kind of learn that right in the beginning of the film. But
right.
yeah, I think this one definitely. I mean, obviously, I haven't seen the other ones. I think this one stands on its own. I think most prequels generally do a good job of standing on their own.
Right.
Like at least I think all the ones we've mentioned, they pretty much like obviously something like Lion King 1.5 or 1.5 or some of these other ones that are kind of like both, or maybe the Mamma Mia one. They kind of need the original one
Sure,
to
sure.
stand on because they're kind of playing both fields there.
Yes.
But I think for most part, most of them that are legitimately just standalone prequels, I think. pretty like all the ones we've mentioned, I think do pretty much stand on their own where you could watch like start with those and not I mean would I recommend that? No, especially not for Star Wars anyway. But I think you could.
Yeah.
Like I did with Prey, just start here with the new one or whatever introduction. Like I saw going back to Wonka for a second, I saw one of the Letterboxd reviews where they were saying like they loved that this would be a generation's introduction to Willy Wonka, and like this would be like kind of like Gene Wilder is our Willy Wonka, like this, like Timothy Chalamet would be people's like the younger generation's Willy Wonka, and they really liked the idea.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that's really cool that you can start it with some of these, and they can stand on their own.
Definitely. Definitely. Great. Great stuff. All right. Let's jump into your number four, Josh. What do you got?
All right, so for number four, I have Casino Royale with
Oh,
Daniel
okay.
Craig as Bond.
Yeah.
So I know all of the James Bonds, every time they change actors, is sort of like a reboot, but kind of like Doctor Who without like exactly continuing a continuity.
Right.
But this one is different because it does go back before he's even a double O.
That's a good
And
point.
like obviously, like he gets it right in the beginning, but
Right.
um like you're seeing the beginnings of him as a double O agent,
Yes.
which is really cool. And of course, the editing and directing and everything is, and the action is fantastic. It's edited super tight. It's fresh. I really liked something that stood out to me this time was David Arnold's score, which I know
Mm,
the theme. I've heard the I think I've pulled the theme out of the soundtrack before and put that in a playlist, but like I haven't really paid attention to the score of this movie otherwise.
right.
And I aside from like maybe Sherlock. I think David Arnold did that. I haven't
Mm,
really listened to anything he's done, but
hmm.
it was really cool hearing like realize like pay attention to some of the scoring this time that caught my attention and kept catching my attention. So
Right.
that was pretty cool.
That is
But
cool.
yeah, I don't know the even the beginning, even the
Mm.
opening scene, like it threw me off because I forgot it was in black and white. So I'm like,
Yeah.
did I buy a black and white copy? Did they make a black and white copy of the movie?
Right.
But actually, I wish they did. That would be dope.
Yeah.
I would 100% watch this movie in black and white.
Me too.
Um, but just that first scene and with the black and white opening and him becoming a double O agent or whatever, it just really gets the ball rolling. And you kind of, it's a good way. I don't know if they've done this before, but it's a good way to do a new casting of Bond because you're kind of getting both the beginning of Bond and then the beginning of Bond or Craig as Daniel Craig as Bond. So it kind of works. It really works together well, really
It
nicely.
does. Yeah, they've never done that before. It's the first time we've ever seen Bond this young getting his
Mm,
license to kill. Yeah, they always start with him in the middle of a mission. He's already been an agent for some time. So yeah, it was really revolutionary what they did with that film. Great. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of it as well. Craig is my Bond. You know, he's the one I grew up
same.
watching in theaters and yeah, I was a huge fan of Casino Royale. It's still one of the best all-time Bond movies in my book. It's not quite my
Yes.
favorite, but it's definitely up there, really high. And yeah, the whole series of his films, like in Casino Royale, there's no Q, who's his gadget
Yeah.
guy. He ends up coming in Skyfall.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like it slowly built, like each movie built an element of the Bond myth, until the
Yeah.
end, which I thought was a cool way to do it. And so yeah, yeah, Casino Royale, Martin Campbell, one of my favorite directors. He did Mask of Zorro, which is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yes.
And he's a really good director. They did a great job just presenting that story. And Eva Green as Vesper is one of my favorite characters in that whole thing. Jeffrey Wright is great in it as well. So there's just a
Yes.
great cast, and the action is spectacular. A lot of it's practical,
Hmm.
and you can tell, the stunt guys really went all out for that film. But yeah, they made Bond more of a character. They really went into who he is as a person and kind of why
Yes.
he is the way he is in all the other movies that we've seen. So it was just very clever, very smart, very good script, and it's a fairly long movie, but like you were saying, it breezes by. I mean, I know it's over at least over 2 hour, 2:15, 2:20 maybe.
Yeah,
Um,
I think this one, I think they're all about like around the 2.5 mark,
Right, right. Yeah, but like you
220.
said, they really are pretty quickly paced. But they
Hmm.
take quiet moments with the characters, I think, is what really makes them stand out from previous Bond
Hmm.
films. Like I said, very character based. So yeah, great pick. Great pick. I didn't think about that because that was another one I thought, well, it's really a reboot again. They're just recasting. But like you said, we do get that backstory in the opening,
Hmm.
which really is different and definitely I think would qualify as a prequel. So great selection. All right, moving on to my number four. We have a Star Wars film. It might not be the one you're expecting. It's Solo.
Ah.
Solo, a Star Wars story. This one is the one that every time I watch it, I like it more.
Mm,
It's one that I think just it's so much fun. I think just when I
it
think
is.
fun, like Star Wars movie that I can just throw on, this is the my go-to Star Wars movie just for kind of watch anytime. I don't feel like I have to watch the whole trilogy or, it ties in with that. Like it does tie in obviously with episode four.
Yeah.
It's Han and Chewie's first meeting, how they get the Falcon, it's the whole thing. But just the way they did it was great. I feel like, you mentioned earlier fan service. I feel like this one does it so well because it's all story based and
Hmm.
it's all character based. There's no like kind of random thing that comes in that kind of takes me out of the movie. It's all Han Solo's journey to becoming the kind of roguish scoundrel smuggler we all know and love from episode four. So it's just really smart. The writing, it was written by John Kasdan, son of Lawrence
Mm.
Kasdan, who wrote Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and The Force Awakens. So he's got a long history with the franchise. He also wrote my favorite film of all time, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So he's one of my favorite writers. He went on to having a pretty cool directing career as well. But
Oh,
it's his son that wrote it, and Ron Howard directed it. Now, of course, we know the story behind the scenes. Phil Lord and Chris Miller were supposed to direct it. They actually directed on it for a couple weeks. Didn't end up working out. There were creative differences. They kind of had a different vision for the story. And so they ended up leaving the project. Ron Howard was brought in, who's just a consummate professional. Every movie he makes, I feel like is like a four-star film. It's just really solid filmmaking every
yeah.
time he comes out. So
Yep.
he does another great job here, and he really kind of leans into the style that I feel like Lord and Miller kind of started, which is a lot more kind of the just the look of the movie, the cinematographer he kept on board. It does
Mm.
have a bit of a darker tone, most of it, and just a more gritty kind of feel to it. It's really kind of a leans into the Western elements of Star Wars,
Hmm.
Western kind of heist film. It's
Yeah.
all about my favorite element of Star Wars is the criminal underworld, all the smugglers and bounty hunters and all that. So it's all about that. That's at the forefront. There's no Jedi, there's one Force user, right, who shows up in a cameo with his lightsaber. But other than that, there's none of that stuff going on, which is I think really cool and kind of a bold
Hmm.
choice to make for a Star Wars movie because all that stuff is so ingrained in Star Wars fans. We just
Mm.
always expect a lightsaber duel and a big space battle, but we don't get we don't get the lightsaber duel here. We don't really get anything like that. So there's really not even hardly a mention of the Force. So it's
Mm.
unique. It's a great mix of characters as well. I really like Alden Ehrenreich as Han. I think he brings a sort of like naivete and a kind of youthful energy to
Mm.
Han, whereas he's not the kind of like world weary character that we meet in episode four, where he's kind
Yeah.
of just like over it all and he's kind of enthusiastic, Han.
Mm.
And so I
He's
like that element.
he's not jaded yet.
Exactly, exactly. He's not jaded at all. And so, yeah, he's got that kind of, but he's still got that charm to him that I
Hmm.
think works really well. So it's just a really smart performance in that how he set it apart from Harrison Ford, but yet leaned into some things that are just make the character the character. Of course, we also have Yunus Swatomo as Chewbacca, who played the role in the sequel trilogy, taking over for Peter Mayhew after his passing. He just really does a great job. It's so seamless, and it seems I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of people don't give him a lot of credit because they're like, well, he's under all the makeup and he just has to growl and kind of move around. But there's really very specific nuances to that character and his physicality
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
he just plays perfectly. I mean, it's just the continuity with that character from he does show up in episode three, right? It's a small cameo role there with Yoda.
Yeah.
And there's continuity from that to Solo to episode four that just feels so perfect. The character's just
Mhm.
fully there. I love their meeting. The way they meet in the pit is just such a great scene. It's so funny, and it's just so well played. They have a great back and forth, those two. Then of
Mhm.
course we have Amelia Clarke, who's fantastic as
Yeah.
Kira.
Great character.
Great new character that we hadn't heard of before, didn't know about, and how instrumental she is in how Han becomes the Han that we know later.
Mhm.
Then we have, of course, Woody Harrelson, who's fantastic, who's, the kind of mentor figure here. It's like, okay, like as soon as we see him, we're like, okay, that's kind of who Han becomes, a little bit. And
Mhm.
there's that whole thing and the lesson he learns about shooting first, which is so perfect for me. Love that. Is it's so good. And then of course his whole crew, which we don't get a lot of time with, Tandy Newton is really good in this, even though she's not on screen very long. And then, of course, Rio, who is voiced by Jon Favreau. And he's a character that I
Mm.
really like, even though he's, again,
Yeah.
not on screen very long at all. He's very likable instantly. And
Mhm.
I kind of want his whole backstory. I'm very curious about the Rio Disney Plus show that I hope they end up making. That's my wish, my fan wish. And then, of course, rounding out the cast, Donald Glover as Lando, another character that an actor who just perfectly captures Billy D. Williams, yet has his own spin on it.
Mhm.
He's not quite the smooth, charming, responsible leader that we see him as in episode five. He's much more the kind of scoundrel smuggler character, who's kind of a cheater and a swindler, that whole kind of thing, which is fun to see him play that. And of course, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is L3, who I had a lot of fun with that character. I think she's really, really got a lot of spirit and spunk to her. So
Mhm.
just a great cast. I had to mention all of them because they're all so good in the movie, and the action sequences are really fun. The Kessel Run was everything I hoped it would be. After hearing about it for 40 years or whatever, however long it had
Yeah.
been, I thought it really delivered on that. The whole presence of the Empire, I think, kind of looming over the film is really
Mhm.
cool. Again, great humor, but some great drama as well. Uh, Really good romance, again, between Han and Kira. I think that opening sequence with them and then going all the way through the next time they meet, which is years later, I think all of that just works exceedingly well. So again, it's a
Mhm.
movie that I kind of was on the fence about, honestly, when I heard they're doing a Han Solo backstory. I was like, ooh, that could turn out to be really bad. But I think
Yeah.
they really delivered, and on checked all the boxes for me. And again, every time I watch it, I just get more enjoyment out of it. So that made number four. That's where it ends up.
Yeah. And that one's unfortunately gotten some of the, I mean, it's underrated, honestly.
It is.
It's gotten some of the negativity passed over to it from The Last Jedi for people who didn't like that movie,
Right. It
unfortunately.
came out, yeah, like
Um,
5 months later. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so people were still grumbling about that movie, and so they were like anti-Star Wars at that point. And
Right.
unfortunately, Solo didn't get a fair shake.
It didn't.
But it is legitimately, just like you said, a super solid film, like
Yeah.
all of Ron Howard's films are. So
Right.
whether whether you like Star Wars or Ron Howard, you're gonna like this film.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, and they've already admitted, Bob Iger came out and was like, "Yeah, we shouldn't have released that in May. That was a bad choice. We should have waited at least till the next December." It was like two
Mm.
Star Wars movies. It felt like in a row, and it was just too
Yeah,
much at one
yeah.
time. And so yeah, it didn't get a fair shake definitely when it was released. I think over time it's gotten a little cult following,
Mm.
and it's kind of grown in popular. It's the lowest grossing Star Wars movie, but I think over time again it's gotten some fans on board, and I really want a sequel. I really want to see. I just want to know what happens to Kira. Honestly, that's such a big plot thread that's still out there for Star Wars that I really feel like they need
Mm.
to resolve. Finishing out her story, but also Maul's, like kind of in between where
Yes.
we see him in Clone Wars and Rebels, that whole
Yes.
section that we don't know about.
That
So hopefully we get something.
is a whole underworld and underbelly of Star Wars in this era right here that's just chock full of great potential that they haven't
Definitely.
tapped yet. So,
Absolutely.
and
Definitely.
maybe that'll be one of the like the movies that they've hired a director for that we don't know what it is yet.
Could
Maybe they'll
be.
do something.
Could be, could be. We'll stay hopeful, as all
Yes.
Star Wars fans should. All right, moving on to your number three. What you got?
So for my number three, kind of also treading that like interesting sort of prequel view vantage point, I guess, if you will, Skyfall.
Okay.
So so technically, it's kind of like we're down the kind of like Planet of the Apes. We're down the line of the prequels, but
Right,
I really thought even more so than War for the Planet of the Apes. This one was more of a prequel because, like you said, this is where they introduce Q.
right,
You really see that like this film transitions Craig's Bond into the time period, or not the time period, but like the format, if you will,
right.
that we see for all the other James Bonds.
Exactly.
Um, like except for where Judi Dench is M for Pierce Brosnan,
Yes,
um, the traditionally M is a male. So
correct.
you have Ralph Fiennes, who I probably butchered his name,
Or it's
as
actually
Mallory.
Rafe. Sorry.
Rafe. Ah,
Yeah.
okay. So I got part of it. Rafe Fiennes,
Yes.
coming in as Mallory,
Yeah.
and being the his last name's Mallory, the traditional M character,
Right.
which another I honestly I prefer Judi Dench. She just does such a fantastic job.
Yeah.
But as far as like stereotypically, it's a male role. So we got that. We have the reveal of Moneypenny at the end,
Yes.
her
Yes.
being, and who that character is, we're not told until the end, which is
Yeah.
really good there.
Yep.
Yeah, so just like all these sort of little elements, kind of all like you mentioned earlier, are all coming back to like the stereotypical version that we see of the world of Bond, at least.
Right.
So that's kind of why I was like, this it counts, even though it's two movies later than the first one that I put.
Right.
I'm still gonna count it as a spiritual prequel, I guess you could say.
Sure. Sure. I gotcha.
But yeah, just from this was also my first Bond film
Oh.
in theaters too, so that was kind of it was cool. It was interesting because like you said, things are getting introduced.
Mm.
So Q's there, but he's not. It's not like he is in the other films where it's like, here's all this technology. It's like you get a radio and a uh, gun that only works for you, and that's
Right.
it. That's all you
Right.
got. So some I think when I initially saw it, I was a little disappointed that like it was like, oh, that's all you got technology wise. Like I was like, well, where's the cool gadgets? And there wasn't really, at least not in this film,
Right.
but
Right.
that's okay. We see it later and earlier with other bonds as well.
Right.
But I really enjoy it. Obviously, Deakins' cinematography is just absolutely fantastic. I think that, like the story itself too, and Javier Bardem's villain, I think he's my favorite Bond villain. I could probably say he's probably the best. Like you're scared of him. Like
Yeah.
he brings that unpredictable, unhinged, but like super controlled. It's like
Yeah.
I can't think of another villain to compare it to, but like they're crazy, but they're smart.
Yeah.
And
Kind of
so
like
those
Joker.
yes, okay. That's
Yeah.
what I was like, is it Joker?
Yeah.
Yes, when
Yeah.
you're like you don't know what they're gonna do, but
Right.
they know what they're doing.
Right.
And those are like some of the scariest villains.
Yeah.
And I think Bardem pulls it off here expertly. But
Mm.
I think him and Deakins' cinematography really make this movie stand out to me. Like I have a really hard time. Like if you put a gun to my head, maybe I can pick a favorite. But between Casino Royale, this one, and No Time to Die, like I love them all. Like if I could put them all as number one for Bond films, I would.
Yeah.
But there's like individual things that I really like about them and why I want them all to be number one.
Right.
But for me, this one, it's Deakins' cinematography and Bardem as a villain.
Yeah.
It's just even I would compare Deakins' cinematography on here to 1917. Like in both
Mm.
of them, they just stand out and they stick with you
Yes.
just so well.
Totally agree. Yeah, that is yeah, I think that is my number one Bond movie. It's really like you're
Skyfall.
saying, the all three of those you mentioned. I'm a big fan of From Russia with Love, the Sean Connery one. But yeah, something about like you're saying, the visuals combined with that story, that villain, the backstory,
Mhm.
like the way it all ties in with M, and it's a perfect movie. It's 5 stars.
Yeah,
It's one of my
it all
favorites of
just
all
like
time.
interweaves together.
Yeah, yeah. So well done. So well done. So yeah, Skyfall is definitely up there for me. So great pick. Let's move on to my number three, which
Mhm.
would be The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. part of the Man with
Ah.
No Name trilogy. So we had A Fistful of Dollars, which was released first, 1964. Then 1965, they released For a Few Dollars More. And in 1966, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Sergio Leone working with Clint Eastwood in his most popular role, I would probably say, as the Man with No Name. He's uh he's a just a great actor and brings this character to life in such a fantastic way. These movies weren't ever really intended as a trilogy necessarily. They were all just kind of made back to back, and they featured Clint Eastwood. He actually has a different
Mm.
name in each. That's why it's called The Man with No Name. He has a different name in each movie.
Oh,
But they are loosely connected because, especially because of what happens in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I'll give you one minor spoiler, which is the main thing that really connects. It's just a very loose connection, but the character we see find out how he gets his signature poncho in this third
mm.
movie, and so he has the poncho in the first two movies. At the beginning of Good, Bad, and the Ugly, he doesn't have it. Then we see him come across it, so we're like, oh, so that's how he got it in the other two movies. But again, it's not technically a trilogy. It was never intended as a trilogy, really. Fans just over time have gone, these three movies work as a trilogy, so they're going to be called a trilogy, and they release them in a box set, so it's official now.
Nice.
So it's really a different kind of trilogy, a different kind of movie. Good, the Mad, the Ugly, it just stands on its own. So while all three of the movies do, they're all great westerns, spaghetti westerns, shot in Italy. And they're just expertly made films. Leone is just such a visual storyteller, and
Mm.
he does it so well. The way he uses the camera, the widescreen, using the desert landscape, the way he shoots things, just iconic imagery of, gunslingers, gunfights and things like that, close-ups on the eyes, all these things that have been done so much now that we kind of take it for granted, but
Yeah.
this is where it started, right? So it's great on a visual level, it's great on a character level. The way the good, the bad, and the ugly, those three characters interact is great.
Mm.
Eli Wallach and Lee Van Cleef both play their roles expertly as well. Editing is super good. It's a long movie. It's an epic 3 hour film. It flies by. It's another one of those movies that just goes by very quickly because you're just so engaged in the characters and what's going on. And then of course I can't fail to mention Ennio Morricone's great score, which is also iconic. That whistle and the wah wah. That whole thing. I mean,
Ah.
it's been done over and over again. This is where it came from. And so yeah, so that's a favorite of mine. It's one of my favorite westerns ever made.
Mm.
Definitely in the top 10. But yeah, it's a good one. It's a good prequel. It's a good one to start with. But I really kind of suggest that people watch the other two first, just because you see the filmmaking style built like throughout. You see, the
Ah.
become better filmmakers. Like they had a very low budget on the first two movies.
Mm.
And so this one had a bigger budget. It's a bigger story. It's again a 3 hour film. The others are like 100 minutes. The first one's 100 minutes.
Oh,
Second
okay.
one's 2 hours. This one's 3 hours. So that again, it's just that kind of progression you see. And again, there's not any big thing that happens in the first two that's gonna go, oh, that's a major spoiler for what happened in Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's
Mm.
basically just the poncho. That's the main thing. So
Oh, okay.
poncho origins, you could call it. But yeah, it's a good film. Definitely worth checking out. Have you seen this one yet?
No,
Okay.
it's one of my said this along with The Godfather and
Yeah,
Rocky are some of my bigger blind spots movie wise.
gotcha.
Um, but could now you said it's not like supposed to be a trilogy, but did they intend it as three stories in the same world? Not necessarily like here's a story where they're all connected and blah blah blah, but like
Right.
three different snapshots of stories that are it is intended to be in the same world. Would you say
I
that would be true?
definitely feels that way. Yeah, definitely feels like, hey, we've got a great idea for three westerns. Let's make
Hmm.
them all with the same cast and crew, basically, is what they did. Because again, they had a very low budget, limited time. So yeah, it
That
definitely
makes sense.
feels like they all fit. Even if it's not like, oh, that happens and then that happens, and then it's all three
Mhm.
separate stories, but they all work together.
Okay.
All right, so that's my number three. Josh, let's go over to your number two.
So number two, I feel like all of these maybe I shouldn't have included because they're like sequels to prequels, but they're still all prequels.
Okay.
So I don't know. I kind of feel bad about some of these, but maybe in this one the most. But Days of Future Past,
Okay.
and
Okay. Yeah.
it does more take place in the past in the 60s at this point, 70s.
Yeah.
Um,
We might as well talk about my number two because it's First Class. So let's just
oh,
talk about both
okay,
of these right
awesome.
now because
Yeah,
I prefer First Class. Let me talk about it first since it takes place first.
it does. Yeah.
So like you just said, it's in the 60s. I love that it's a historical setting in a real historical
Yes.
event, which is the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was a great
I love
idea.
that.
Like all the best prequels, to me, it greatly enhances the original film. So that original
Yes.
X-Men trilogy with Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, getting their backstory just makes you love those characters so much more because you really get where they come from. You get that
Hmm.
relationship, which is at the
Yes.
heart of First Class, is Xavier and Magneto coming together and helping one another
Hmm.
in such big ways. And so McAvoy and Fassbender are the highlight here for me across this entire prequel. I guess it's not
Oh
a
yeah.
trilogy, four films, quadrilogy.
Yeah.
They're just wonderful. Every scene they're in, they're so in it. They're so emotional and just it's just you can feel everything that they're feeling. So the performances are off the charts. The supporting cast is great. In First Class, I really like Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique.
Mhm.
Kevin Bacon as the villain Sebastian Shaw. I think he did a
Yeah.
fantastic job playing both Schmidt and then Shaw later. It's like kind of feels like two totally different guys, but there's continuity there too at the same time.
Hmm.
So really interesting performance. Henry Jackman's score is phenomenal. Really, really, when it hits in, when they're in the X jet at the final scene going in to save this, get the sub and all that, the music just swells and it's just fantastic. One of my
Mm.
favorite scenes in any of the X-Men movies. Beautiful cinematography. I really like that it's very colorful and vibrant. It's very 60s. It almost
Yeah.
has a 60s Bond feel to it. Again, the color, the kind of vibrant color palette, and just very stylish camera work and things like that.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's an emotional story. It's extremely well written. I mean, all the dialogue and the character arcs, again, even the supporting cast, the kind of younger mutants that join the team, they each have a kind of little character arc, especially with Beast. Nicholas Hoult as Beast, I think was fantastic in
Yeah.
this. So all of that is just so well done. Matthew Vaughn, I really like him as a director. I haven't liked a whole lot of his recent films. This I think is his best.
Yeah.
But I'm hopeful for Argyle, which is coming up soon. And I just think he did a really, really good job with his kind of vision for this earlier take on the characters. I think it just worked really, really well. All right, so yeah, those are my kind of thoughts on First Class, which is might be my favorite X-Men movie. It's great, but what do you think?
It's pretty close. Like
Yeah,
you said, these films, and I think these are probably actually some of the best films to do this, where, like you said, they enhance the originals. And I think, especially these first two, are like bar none for being able to enhance the enhancement they bring to the originals. Because, like you said,
yes,
it's all about the characters, especially Charles and
Eric,
Eric's
yep,
relationship, and it just makes everything else, well, everything that happens in this movie, and then like knowing what's gonna what how the situation is later, and then just like tying those two relationships together, or the past and present. It just does. It makes it so much more painful.
yeah,
I guess bittersweet kind of, because
right,
it's like that brotherly love relationship, and it's just so good. And then you know where it's gonna go, and you see how it starts to turn here at the end of this one,
yeah,
and it's just like heart wrenching,
yeah,
because you're like, you guys are like so close, but you're just like just a little off from each other,
right,
like
hmm
and yeah, and characters are something that this film does like the best.
yeah,
Probably not only in how they enhance their other films, but I think as far as the amount of gravitas, I guess, emotional depth, and
hmm
that the characters bring for all these films,
yeah,
I think it is also like among the best.
it is.
At least in my opinion. And yeah, First Class has it, and Days of Future Past has it as well. And I think they add to that in Days of Future Past by bringing Jennifer Lawrence's Raven Mystique into it, into kind of making it almost like a not a trinity, but like three people. You know, instead of
Yes,
just being
yes,
Charles and Eric, now it's Charles,
right.
Eric, and Raven. And you
Yeah.
kind of get that a little bit in First Class, but I think
Hmm.
especially because she's kind of the focus of the story or the focus of the villain,
Right.
um, his goal, he needs her, and so
Hmm.
that kind of automatically like brings her into like the center of the
Yes.
story. That's kind of like everything going around it, and so just the three of them, I
Hmm.
think, really shine in this film, especially Jennifer Lawrence's performance. Something
Yeah.
I really like about the prequels is that unlike X2, is they don't really objectify her, which
Mm.
is nice. There's no
Sure.
like intentional camera angles and whatnot. And so
Right.
I really like that, obviously. But just her performance is incredible with I don't know, just like I said, the three of them together and what they have to go through as on their own, and then what they have to go through with each of the in their relationship with the other characters, and how
Right.
one's trying to pull them to they're trying to
Yeah.
pull them to the other side. Charles is trying to say, no, there's the good in you, even though I know you took the step away from me.
Right.
And you see that how it even built in First Class with him his and Raven's relationship, of how he's trying to look out for her, but she kind of takes it a different way. And you
Mm.
kind of see how all of that builds, and then comes to fruition. And then he kind of like regrets what he did, and he's trying to make up for it. And it's just so good. Like
Yeah.
you could not have like any other characters in the film but those three,
Right.
and it would still work.
Yes.
I mean, obviously you
Exactly.
need Wolverine in this one because yeah, someone has to go back.
Right.
um, because this is another one kind of like Mamma Mia, where it's like a sequel but also a prequel.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, and Hugh Jackman's great in this film too. Like he's
Hmm.
the one we're kind of seeing everything through,
Right.
which is a cool aspect to bring to the instead of they're not just like doing the same thing again like they did in
Right.
First Class.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
they're bringing a new approach to it,
Hmm.
and yeah, and Nicholas Holt's character as Beast is get I don't know if he's given more to do, but I guess we see him more as Beast, which is cool too.
Right.
So and you kind of see even his relationship kind of come into play with Raven. So I don't know. It's just and Peter Dinklage is as great as the villain. Like
Oh yeah.
everyone just does fantastic in all of these films. Every all the acting, everyone's hitting on all cylinders or operating on all cylinders. It's
Yeah.
both films are excellent,
Yeah.
and First Class was really close to making the top five just because it is so good. But I
Yeah.
think Days of Future Past is one of my favorite superhero films in general.
Yeah. It's definitely a good one. I think why First Class wins out for me is I feel like it's a little simpler, right? I mean, at
It
Days of Future
is, yeah.
Past, it does have a lot more going on, and
Hmm.
we also have in Days of Future Past, you have both casts, right? You have the young cast and the old
Hmm.
cast, some playing the same character. So specifically, Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are both in that film, and that to me creates just a little bit of a disconnect because
Because you
of
see them both.
yeah, I mean, yeah, you definitely see McAvoy and Stewart on screen together. So that just makes
Oh
a little
yeah.
bit, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And then he tried his best. Michael Fassbender with First Class, he was just doing his natural accent. In Days of Future Past, he tried to emulate McKellen more because they were in the same film together. So he wanted to try to
Oh,
really copy his voice as close as he could. And he does a good job. He does a good job, but it's just again when you're seeing them in the same movie, it doesn't to me it doesn't quite work as well as First Class, where
mm,
it's just them and you're just kind of in the back of your mind thinking about the older versions of them. So
yeah.
that's a slight negative for me on Days of Future Past. Again, a lot going on. I don't feel like it's as well paced. The Rogue cut I do prefer, actually. We get an extra moment with Rogue as a character who, if you notice in a reflection, you see Rogue in the theatrical cut. They
Oh,
didn't take her out of one. It's a very quick shot. You wouldn't notice if you weren't looking for it, but she is actually in the theatrical cut. But the Rogue cut I prefer because not only do we see her, we have this little side mission with them going to rescue her. It's Magneto and an Iceman. with
Mm.
Professor X going to rescue her, which is a great sequence. And the way they cut it in with Magneto going to get his helmet in the past, it's just a really good sequence, really well edited sequence. And you also get an extra moment with Beast and Mystique, which I like. So I prefer the Rogue cut. Have you seen the Rogue cut or no?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I don't know. Sometimes a lot of the other cuts that aren't necessarily director's cuts, like some of
Mhm.
the even like the Spider-Man, like Spider-Man 2.1, and
Oh
some of
yeah.
those.
Right.
Like it's kind of a mixed bag. Like I
Mm.
like something kind of like when you watch deleted scenes, you're like, oh, I wish that was in the movie. Like
Yes.
Last Jedi, I wish Luke mourning over Han was in the movie. But then
Right.
so you see some other scenes and you're like, well, I'm glad that wasn't in the movie.
Right.
And so
Right.
it kind of is like that for me with the road cut. Like I
Gotcha.
really like the stuff they did, but then
Hmm.
I don't think it was the specific scene you mentioned, but there was another scene where like it kind of the adding in the other scene kind of threw off, at least to me, threw off the pacing of the or like distracted from what they were doing
Right.
in the other
Sure.
going back.
Gotcha.
So I don't know, hit or miss.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. But yeah, anyways, great films that are definitely worth checking out. Again, films that I think you could start with
Yeah.
and go into the originals if you wanted. Although I think there's a line Professor X says, when I was 17, I met Magneto, but he's clearly not 17 when they meet in
Oh.
the first class. But so there's little things like that, but
Well,
overall it
the whole
works very
X-Men
well.
timeline
Yeah,
continuity is
it's a
all over the
mess.
place.
Right.
It's just kind of understood at this point. If
Yes.
something continuity-wise doesn't work, you just roll with
Just go with it.
it.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Great picks though. Great picks. All right. Moving on to our number one picks. Josh, you're up first. What do you have as your favorite prequel of all time?
So I feel like it's quite possible we both have the same one. I don't know, maybe. But I went with number one being Rogue One.
Oh, he went Rogue One. I did not go Rogue One.
Okay. I thought
No.
maybe because you mentioned Solo earlier, and you're like, not the one you're expecting. So I thought maybe it was
Right.
gonna come back.
Right.
Um, yeah. So to me, this is like I don't know. This is probably my favorite prequel. I mean, I think I like Days of Future Past better as a movie, but I think as a prequel, I think like this is technically more of a prequel than Days of Future Past is. And it just, obviously you can't beat leading right into the next movie, like in the way they did. It's
It's
just absolutely
seamless. Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just perfect.
Hmm.
And like it answers like all the questions like of how did they get the Death Star plans and why is there this flaw that kind of doesn't make sense when you think about it. And
Right.
then John Knoll,
Yes.
coming up with the idea, which is so cool that I love that. This is just an aside; it's not really necessarily part of the movie about the movie, but I love that. I love when things happen like someone's in the world of Star Wars, someone's in the world of whatever movie they're working on, and he's like a visual effects guy. He's with ILM.
Right.
He's not part of the writing team,
Yeah.
but like he has this idea, and I love that. Like there's this openness, at least in Lucasfilm, anyway, to be like ideas can come from anywhere. Great ideas can come from anywhere. You don't have to be a writer, a
Yep.
screenwriter to have a workable idea for a Star Wars movie or what have you. And
Yeah.
so I just love that he was like he had this idea and even though he's not like a part of the writing team, they were like, yeah, this is great. And then they roll
Yes.
with it.
Right.
And we get this movie, which is
Definitely.
just so well done with like the great cast of characters. Everyone does an excellent job. You like everybody. Everyone is has each of their own qualities that make them likable. And I think Jin's a little bit prickly in the beginning. That's kind of what her role is. Actually, her and Andor a little bit, except he's not really prickly. He's just like, oh, he's kind of a dark good guy. So I like, which is unique for Star Wars. We don't really see a lot of that.
Right.
But both of them kind of as they grow as each of their characters grow in the film, you come to like them just as much as you like everybody else, and maybe more, and probably more, because they're the main characters. But
Mhm.
I don't know. Everyone's just fantastic in this film. I think this film what made me realize who Ben Mendelsohn was. He's a great villain as Krennic, which is like I think technically they point him out later in episode four or something, but that's kind of like a rewrite. He's not really, I think Krennic was created for this movie.
Yeah.
And that's true of all these characters. Like the fact that they're this good and that they're, like you like them this much and they're all do such a good job and that they were created like they're not like, oh yeah, we mention them later, so we, like they're not necessarily, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but like because they're all brand new to the story here
Yeah,
in such a large, well-known, established universe, the fact that they can
right.
all do such a good job and be this likable and be this well done of characters is something I think is impressive.
Yes, definitely.
Um,
I agree. Yeah, there's I think what you were referring to is in episode 4 when we go to that meeting on the Death Star, there's an empty chair somewhere and they're like, "Oh,
that's
that
what
was
it
Krennic's
is.
chair." But
That's what it
he's
is. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So and that's just like a fun coincidence. Like
Sure, sure.
I don't. It would be interesting to know why that chair is empty
Right.
in the like. I'm sure someone knows somewhere why that chair was empty that day
Right.
when they were filming that scene. But yeah, I the only other thing I can't leave without saying K2SO and the Darth Vader scene at the end are just those are probably the two biggest things of and Michael Giacchino's score are
Right.
probably the three biggest things why this movie like sticks with me and why it's my number one prequel.
Excellent, excellent choice. Yeah, Rogue One, I vividly remember seeing it in theaters. The hype surrounding it was big because it was the first of these kind of, sort of Star
Mm.
Wars stories or anthology films that were kind of, not a main saga movie. It was kind of its own thing, almost like a spin-off almost. But yeah, the way it tied in was just brilliant. Like you said, it just
Hmm.
really works so well watching that and then watching episode 4. And it just expands the galaxy in a really cool way. Like you're saying, all new characters. Of course, we have Vader and Tarkin in there, but
Hmm.
mostly all new characters that are main characters. So yeah, it's very well done, very well shot. Gareth Edwards, huge lifelong
That's
Star Wars
true.
fan, did a really good job with the visual storytelling. Went through rewrite
Beautiful
rights and all
film.
kinds of stuff. Yeah, yeah, the cinematography is great. But even with the rewrites and reshoots, you can't tell it's all, like I said, just kind of
Hmm.
seamless, goes all the way through. So yeah, we've talked about it before. I'm not a huge fan of some of the fan service moments, and there's a couple moments with the moment with Ponda Baba and Dr. Evzan. They're bumping into Cassian and Jin kind of awkwardly. Like there's a couple of just they're little moments that just take me out of the movie a little bit, which is why it's not among my favorite prequels or Star Wars films even. But overall, it looks great, and the final battle. I mean, the climax of this film is, I would put it, I don't know, up there with some of the best Star Wars
Mm.
finales. I mean, it's just so well done. What's going on with Jin and Cassian, and then the what's going on in space, and then on the beach. It's just fantastic. Everything just
Yeah.
is so well done. So great pick. No, I went with a different pick. It's not a Star Wars film.
Okay.
I already talked about Solo. It's my favorite Star Wars prequel, but my favorite prequel movie of all time is Indiana Jones and the Temple
Ah,
of Doom. Of course, it's got to be Indy, right? He's my favorite
yes.
movie character ever. So, Temple of Doom. A
That's a
lot of people
nice
don't
copy.
know. Oh yeah, I think that this is my 4K Steelbook edition,
Wow, that's beautiful.
which is pretty cool. And so, yeah, we got a full review on the channel of all my indie steelbooks. But a lot of people don't know this takes place 1 year before Raiders of the Lost Ark, which of course was released first in 1981. This one was released in 1984. Harrison Ford back in the role. I like this one a lot because it's another one that I feel like really does enhance Raiders. Although I wouldn't necessarily say watch this before Raiders, I would still say
Hmm.
start with Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's the perfect kind of introduction to the character. Although the intro here is cool because, as people know, the story goes, Steven Spielberg wanted to make a James Bond movie, and George Lucas said, "No, I've got a better idea. Let's make Indiana Smith," and they turned it into Indiana Jones. And uh, so this film is cool because it starts with Indy in a tuxedo, much like James Bond wears. So it's kind of got that little callback, and it is a great introduction to Indy and that whole Shanghai sequence, which is tons of fun.
Hmm.
Opening musical number and the whole deal. Introduction to Kate Capshaw as Willie, who's I love her in that role. I know a lot of people find her very annoying. I find her hilarious. I think she's really funny and just a perfect opposite of Marion, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Which I really like that they, gave us a totally different character in this film. And so she's great. Kihei Kwan, of course, is fantastic as Short Round. Just makes for a great sidekick. He's really funny. He's also
Immediately
very,
likable.
very likable, very capable character, you know? I mean, he gets involved in the
Yeah.
action and stuff, which is really fun to see. And so really like his character as well. Mola Ram, I find to be a terrifying villain, especially the heart scene, you know? I mean, it's one of those
Yeah.
iconic moments. So it's just a very, I like how different it is from Raiders, and I like how it sets itself apart. It's very scary. It's a much scarier movie. It helped create the PG-13 rating,
Yep.
famously. So it definitely has those edgier moments, but like I said, it balances that well, I think, with the comedy,
Mm,
because there is a
that's
lot
a
of
good point.
funny, kind of just silly moments in here as well. So for a lot of people, this one is their least favorite. I don't know very many people who this is their favorite one, but it's one that I greatly enjoy
Mm,
because of how different it is from Raiders, but yet still has that same serialized adventure vibe to it. So yeah, big fan of Temple of Doom. The continuity here is Indy's arc, which is a very subtle character arc that he has through the original trilogy of here, the younger Indy is much more into fortune and glory and getting the wealth and recognition
mm.
for his discoveries, whereas later on he becomes more about preserving history, and that's kind of more his goal. So it's again, it's a subtle arc. It's not like, oh wow, he's a totally different character at the end of Last Crusade, but it is there. It is there. There is a change there that does happen, and so many iconic moments here. I've got to mention, of course, the mine cart, which is an all-time great. It was literally turned into an amusement park ride at Disneyland, and then we of course had the bridge scene at the end, which is a great
Yeah.
sequence as well. It's so well done, and more great John Williams music. You know, I mean, there's just so much here to enjoy. Special effects are great and hold up really well. So, yeah, ended up at number one as my favorite prequel, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
I need to rewatch this one. I've only seen it once.
Oh, really? Okay.
When we were first going through them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think for me it's the whole the scariness factor, but also the voodoo part is kind of like why I don't care for it that much.
Sure. Yeah.
But I need to give it another shot because like you said, there are so many great things about it, and it does it's probably one of the best, honestly, at traversing that line, like you said, of it being in the same world but not being a repeat. Like
Yes.
taking something, and maybe actually I could probably say that both Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade do it both really well as being
Hmm.
different than Raiders, but in the same world and the same feels and all that, but in two different ways,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is
Yeah, that's a good
interesting.
point. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. They both have definitely their kind of uniqueness, but still feel like an Indiana Jones movie. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's a good point. All right, folks. Well, that's it for the Real World Podcast episode 74, 75 of the Real World Podcast. Make sure you leave a comment below with your favorite prequel films. Again, give us your thoughts on Wonka if you got to see that over the weekend. Make sure you hit the like button, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified of all our videos. Josh, thanks again for joining me. It was a blast.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun talking about these films before the films we know.
Yeah, and a lot of these we haven't talked about before on the podcast, which is a lot of fun too.
That's
So,
true.
yeah, good stuff. All right, folks. Well, thanks again for joining us. Again, make sure you hit the like button, hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified of all our videos. Check the description below for all of our social medias. And Josh and I are both on Letterboxd, so you can follow us there too. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time right here on The Real World.